The man in the pale linen suit put his face 6 inches from mine and told the crowd I was a cardboard cutout. And I knew, before he had finished the sentence, that this was the day my old master had come to watch me hold. I had seen the master arrive an hour earlier. You learn, after years on the box, to take in the whole forecourt without moving your eyes, the way a still pond takes in the whole sky. And so I had marked him the moment the line of visitors thinned at the south arch, and an old man came through it slowly, leaning on a cane he did not really need, his coat buttoned to the throat against a wind that was not cold. Sergeant Major Doran Vale. 20 years retired, and still he walked as if a drill yard were measuring him. He had not written to say he was coming. He never wrote. He had taught me that a man who announces himself has already begun to perform, and a guardsman performs for no one. So he came as the public came, paid nothing, said nothing, and took up a place against the far rail beside a flower seller's empty cart, and he folded both hands on the head of the cane and he waited, the way he had taught me to wait, to see what 20 years had made of the boy he had broken and built. I did not look at him again, but I felt him there the whole time, the way you feel a held note under a song. The man in the linen suit had been working the rail for 10 minutes before he reached me. I had watched him come down the line of sentries, the way a buyer walks down a row of horses, and I had known he would stop at my box because men like him always stop where the audience is thickest, and the audience was thickest at the center arch of the Carradine forecourt where I stood. He had a phone held out at the end of one arm, and a ring of people half laughing behind him, the uncertain laugh of people who do not yet know whether the thing they are watching is funny or about to go wrong. He had the loud, polished confidence of a man who has never once in his life been told no by anyone he could not fire. "Look at this," he said to his phone, to the crowd, to the wide gray morning. "They tell you it's a person. It's not a person. Watch," and he leaned in until I could smell the coffee on his breath and the cologne under it, and he said slowly, as if to a deaf child, "Hello, anybody home? Knock, knock." I held my eyes on the far cornice of the east wing, where the stone griffin keeps its own watch over the gate, and I did not give him so much as the flicker of a lash. This is the first thing they teach you and the last thing you ever truly learn. The eyes are the gate, and the gate does not open. A man can shout in your face for an hour. The trick is not to win. The trick is to be a wall, and a wall does not win or lose. It is simply there in the morning, and there at noon, and there when the loud man has gone home and forgot you. Behind that unmoving face, I will tell you exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking of a frozen drill yard 19 years before, and a sergeant major with frost in his mustache walking a slow circle around a shaking boy, saying, in a voice with no anger in it at all, "The day will come when a fool wants the whole world to watch you break. On that day you will remember that I am watching too, and you will give him nothing, and you will give me everything." I had not understood it then. I was 17 and my arms were on fire from the rifle, and I thought the old man was simply cruel. I understood it now. He was telling me that discipline is not a performance for the man in front of you. It is a promise kept to the man who taught you, across all the years, whether he is there to see it or not. Today, for once, he was there to see it. The man in the linen suit did not like being ignored. They never do. He straightened up and turned to his audience and spread his arms wide, playing to them now. "You see? Nothing. No respect, no nothing. I run a company employs 400 people, 400, and this fellow can't even nod at me." He laughed, and a few of them laughed with him, and a few did not, and a child somewhere near the rail asked his mother in a high clear voice why the soldier was sad, and the mother shushed him, and I held the cornice with my eyes, and I held the morning with my stillness, and I waited. I want to be honest with you about something, because the men who tell these stories are too fond of pretending the wall feels nothing. The wall feels everything. I felt the heat climb the back of my neck the way it always does. I felt the old, simple, animal wish to turn my head 2 inches and look the man in the eye, just to watch the confidence drain out of his face, because I am not a statue. I am a man in a statue's clothes, and the man wanted very much to be looked at. That wish is the enemy. Vale taught me to name it. That heat you feel, he used to say, tapping my breastbone with one blunt finger, is not your anger. It is the fool's anger, and he is trying to pour it into you so that you will carry it for him. Hand it back. Stand there and hand it back to him with both hands, and watch how heavy it gets when he has to hold it alone. So I stood there, and I handed it back. The man tried louder things. He clapped his hands sharply by my ear, the way you'd wake a sleeper. He told a long story about how much his watch cost. He had his friend hold the phone closer, and he counted down from 3 and shouted boo on the one. A grown man in a 40-pound suit shouting boo at a sentry. And the only thing that moved in the whole of the center arch was the chin strap of my bearskin trembling very slightly in the wind, which it would have done if I had been carved from oak. And across the forecourt, against the far rail, my old master watched, both hands folded on the head of his cane, and gave nothing away either. He had taught me my face. I had learned it from his. We stood at two ends of the long stone yard, an old man and the boy he had made, wearing the same nothing, and only the two of us in all that crowd knew that a conversation was taking place, conducted entirely in stillness, across 19 years. Then the man in the linen suit, having failed at everything else, stopped laughing. I felt the change in him before I saw it. The crowd laughter had not come the way he wanted, and a man like that cannot bear to lose an audience he has gathered himself. His voice dropped. He stepped in close again, and the joke was gone out of it, and he said, low, just for me, "I'm talking to you. Look at me when I'm talking to you." And he reached for my rifle. There is a moment in every one of these mornings where the man crosses a line he does not know is there. To him it is all one thing, the jokes, the boo, the hand on the weapon, one continuous performance, escalating because the last bit did not land. To me they are two different countries with a hard border between them. On one side is rudeness, which I am paid to absorb, which is the whole of my craft, which is nothing. On the other side is his hand on the king's rifle, which is a thing I am sworn not to permit, and the law of the land standing behind that oath like a mountain behind a fence. He had been a nuisance. The instant his fingers touched the barrel he became a problem, and a problem has a procedure, and the procedure is older than he is. Here is where most people who tell this story would have me whirl and strike, because that is what they want, the lightning, the lesson taught in a single violent flash. But that is not what Vale drilled into me, and it was Vale's drill the whole forecourt was about to see. The first answer is never the body. The first answer is the voice. I came off the cornice. My eyes dropped from the stone griffin to the man's face, and I will tell you, watching the confident stutter in him when the statue's eyes finally moved was a thing I had to set aside, because the satisfaction of it is its own small trap. I did not glare. Vale hated a glare. A glare is begging, he said. A glare says, I want you to be afraid of me. A king's guard does not want anything from a fool. I simply looked at him level, the way you look at a door that has come off its latch, and I gave the warning, exactly as it is written, in exactly the flat carrying tone we are drilled in until it lives in the body and not the temper. Stand back from the king's guard. 5 words. No more, no fewer. He blinked. The crowd, which had been a soft, uncertain murmur, went very quiet, the particular quiet of people who have just realized the joke has teeth. And I want you to understand what those 5 words are, because they are the heart of the whole craft, and nobody who has not stood the box ever sees it. The warning is not a threat. The warning is a gift. It is the last off-ramp I am required to offer a man before the morning becomes something he cannot undo. Vale made me say it 10,000 times into the cold air of the yard, until I could say it with a man's spit on my collar, and a man's voice cracking in my ear, and not 1/2 degree of heat leaking into the words. Because the heat is the leak, he said, and the leak is where they win. Give the warning clean, and whatever he does next, he does to himself. The man in the linen suit chose to do it to himself. He laughed a thin, surprised, ugly laugh, and he said, "Or what?" and he closed his hand fully around the barrel of my rifle, and he pulled hard, the way a man pulls who has decided he is going to make a soldier dance for his phone. And behind him the friend with the camera said "oh" in a small voice, and the child by the rail had stopped asking questions, and somewhere across the yard an old man's hands tightened on the head of a cane and then, deliberately, loosened again. I felt that. I cannot explain how, with my whole attention on the man hauling at my weapon, I also felt my old master across 40 feet of cobble force his own hands to unclench, but I did, and it steadied me more than any order could have, because I knew what it meant. It meant, not yet, hold. You have not been pushed far enough to need force, and force used early is force that talks. Hold. So I held. A weaker piece of training would have answered the pull with a pull. Most men, when something is yanked, yank back. It is in the meat of us, older than thought. But the rifle does not belong to my pride. It belongs to the post, and the post does not get into a tug of war on the king's cobbles for a stranger's amusement. I let my whole frame settle down into the stones the way Vale taught me on 100 frozen dawns, root through the heel. The weight goes down, not back. You are not a man being pulled. You are the ground he is pulling against. And the man hauled. And I did not move, not the rifle, not my arm, not my boots, nothing. And the only thing his great heave accomplished was to make him stagger half a step toward me when the resistance he expected to give simply was not there. That is the part nobody films well, though 100 phones were filming it. There was no clash. There was a loud, confident man pulling with all his strength at something that had quietly decided not to be moved, and looking, in front of the audience he had gathered himself, like a child trying to drag a lamp post home. The laughter that had been on his side began very slowly to turn. I heard it turn. Vale had told me I would. Stillness is patient, he said. Let the crowd watch long enough and they will always, always come to the wall. It is the loud man who tires first, because noise costs and silence is free. The man felt the crowd turn too, and it enraged him. That is the danger point, not the first grab, which is bravado, but the second move, which is shame looking for somewhere to go. His face went from playing to the camera red to a darker, realer color, and he let go of the barrel and grabbed instead at the strap and the front of my tunic, both fists, and he tried to shake me, this time not for a laugh, this time because I had made him small in front of strangers, and he wanted to make me move so that he could tell himself he had won something. 2 fists on the tunic, a man's full weight thrown into it. And here at last, after the boo and the clap and the cologne and the pull, was the place the procedure stops permitting patience, because a man with 2 hands on a sentry shaking him is no longer a heckler but an assault. And an assault on the box, left unanswered, is a danger to the gate and to everyone behind it, and the whole reason a KingsGuard exists is the gate and the everyone behind it. The wall does not stand for its own dignity. It stands for the people on the other side of it. Vale burned that into me before he ever let me touch a rifle. You are not the wall for your sake. A wall that loves itself is just a man in a costume. You are the wall for theirs. So now, finally, I would move. And I want to be very precise about what moving meant, because it was not what the man wanted and not what the crowd, half of them, were braced for. It was the thing Vale had spent 2 winters drilling into my hands until they did it without me. The thing I had not had to use in 11 years on the box. The thing that was about to be the only reason that morning ended the way it did instead of the way it could have. It was not a strike. The old man across the yard had taught me there is almost never a need to strike, and that a guardsman who strikes when he could have controlled has confessed that his discipline ran out a half-second before his patience did. There is a quieter answer, and it is harder, and it is the true mark of the craft. You do not hit the hands off you. You make the hands let go. Vale called it the turn, though it has a longer name in the manuals nobody reads. The whole of it lives in geometry and timing and not at all in strength, which is why he made me practice it slowly, endlessly, against men twice my size in the cold, until I stopped trying to overpower the grip and started simply taking the grip somewhere it could not follow. Strength fights strength and the bigger man wins, he said. Leverage does not fight. Leverage just shows the hand the only direction left, and the hand goes there because it has no choice, and it thinks it decided. The man had both fists balled in the wool of my tunic, knuckles in toward my chest, his thumbs the strong part of the grip, his elbows out wide and locked with the effort of shaking a thing that would not shake. A locked elbow is a gift. A wide grip is a gift. I had a half second, and in that half second the years did the work for me. The way Vale always promised they would, you will not have time to think, so we will spend 2 winters making sure you do not need to. I did not pull away from him, which is what the body screams to do and which only tightens a grip. I stepped in. One short step, off the line of his pull, in toward the very thing he was hauling on, so that all his straining strength suddenly had nothing to strain against, and his own locked arms buckled at the elbow. In the same motion my left hand came up and over, not a blow, a fold, the back of my white glove laying across the bones of his nearer wrist, and my body simply turned, hips and shoulders together, the way it had turned 10,000 times in the dark of a drill yard, rotating his trapped wrist against the weak seam of the thumb where no man's grip can hold. The whole law of the thing is that a thumb cannot argue with a wrist turned the right way. His fingers opened because they were made to open in that direction, and for no other reason. Both fists came off my tunic at once, not because I struck them off but because I had quietly taken his own arms to the one place they could not stay shut, and he found himself turned half away from me, his own momentum carrying him, his wrist held, not crushed, not wrenched, held, the way you'd hold a door so it doesn't slam, by a man he had been certain was furniture. And then I let him go. That is the part Vale cared about more than the turn itself. Anyone can take a man's balance, he used to say. The question is whether you can give it back. The strike keeps, the control returns. A KingsGuard returns. So the instant his hands were off the king's rifle and off the king's tunic and the danger to the gate was ended, I released the wrist, and I gave him the half step of room he needed to find his own feet, and I stepped back into my line, square on the box, heels together, eyes coming up off him and back to the far cornice and the stone griffin that had watched the whole thing without comment, and I was a statue again. The entire turn, the step, the fold, the rotation, the release, had taken perhaps a second and a half. I had not raised the rifle. I had not raised my voice past those 5 flat words. I had not left a mark on him. I had simply, for 1 second and a half, stopped being a wall and become a craft, and then I had put the wall back up as if it had never come down. The forecourt was silent. The man in the linen suit stood 3 feet from me, breathing hard, his expensive jacket pulled crooked off one shoulder, his phone, he had dropped it. I heard it clatter on the cobbles, and I had not so much as glanced at it lying screen up at his feet still filming the gray sky. And he had the look I have seen perhaps a dozen times in my years on the box and never once enjoyed, whatever the men who tell these stories would have you believe. It is the look of a man who has just felt the floor of his own certainty give way. He had come to prove I was nothing, a cardboard cutout, a thing without a person in it. And the thing without a person in it had, in front of the audience he had personally gathered and personally filmed, taken his hands off itself with the ease of a grown man opening a stuck drawer, and had asked nothing of him, and had said nothing, and had gone back to ignoring him, which was, I understood, the most complete answer of all. To strike him would have been to admit he mattered. To turn him loose and resume the watch as though he were weather was to tell him, and the whole quiet yard, exactly how much he had mattered. Nothing. He had mattered nothing, and now everyone could see it, and worst of all he could see it himself. Nobody laughed with him now. I heard the crowd's silence resolve into something else, a low murmur, then a single pair of hands, then more, a scatter of applause that I did not acknowledge because we do not acknowledge applause. The box is not a stage, and I would have shamed the moment by bowing to it. But I heard it, and I knew what it meant. It meant the wall had won the way the wall is supposed to win, which is to say it had not won at all, it had simply outlasted, and the crowd had come to it the way Vale said they always come. The man bent, fumbling, and picked up his phone. His hands were not steady. He looked at the screen that had been recording the whole time, that he had meant to fill with a soldier dancing for him, and had instead filled with the clearest possible record of himself laying hands on a sentry and being, with no fuss at all, found wanting. I watched him understand what was on that phone. I watched it land on him heavier than any blow I could have struck. He had wanted footage. He had got footage. He would spend a long time wishing he had not. "You," he started, loud again, reaching for the old swagger, but it would not come. The swagger was gone out of the yard, and it was not coming back. And the people who had laughed with him 10 minutes before were not looking at him with amusement now, but with the particular cold distaste a crowd keeps for a man who has tried to bully someone who would not be bullied. He felt it. A man like that always feels the room. He closed his mouth. And then a hand came down on his shoulder from behind, an ordinary hand in an ordinary coat sleeve, and a quiet voice that I knew better than any voice on earth said, "I think that's enough, son. You've shown us all what you came to show us." It was the master, it was Vale. He had crossed the whole 40 feet of the forecourt without my marking it, which tells you something about the old man, who could still move through a crowd like water through a grate at 70-something, leaning on a cane he carried out of theater and not out of need. He did not look at me. That was deliberate. I understood it later. To have caught my eye and nodded would have broken my watch and made me a man in a uniform instead of a sentry on a post, and Vale would have walked into the sea before he did a thing like that to one of his own. So he kept his back half to me and gave the whole of his quiet attention to the man in the linen suit, and he said it again, gentler than the man deserved. "That's enough now." The man rounded on him, glad, I think, to have someone he was allowed to be angry at. You cannot rage at a wall, but here was an old man in a cheap coat. Here was a target his own size. "And who are you?" he said. "Who do you think you are, putting your hand on me? Do you know who I am?" Vale considered the question as if it had been asked in good faith. He had a way of doing that, of taking a fool's bluster and weighing it honestly, which somehow shamed the bluster more than any retort could. "I don't know who you are," he said. "I know what you are. I've watched you for the better part of 15 minutes, son. You came here to find a man who isn't allowed to defend himself, so that you could push him around and feel large doing it. And then you found out he could defend himself the whole time very gently and chose not to until you forced his hand, and now you feel small and you'd like to make somebody pay for that. That's the whole of you. I taught soldiers for 30 years. I have seen 10,000 of you. You are not even an interesting kind of fool." It was not said cruelly. That was the terrible thing about it. For the man, there was no heat in it for him to feed on, no anger to mirror back. It was said the way you described the weather, loudly enough for the front of the crowd to hear, and I watched the last of his swagger go out of him, the way air goes out of a thing that has been punctured cleanly. He looked around for an ally and found none. The friend with the second phone had already drifted backward into the crowd and become very interested in his shoes. He was alone in the middle of a forecourt with his crooked jacket and an old man telling him the plain truth in a kind voice, and there is no defense against that. There has never been a defense against that. A constable was coming across the yard now, unhurried, the way they come when 100 phones have already done the work of witnesses for them. He would take the man's details. He would look later at the footage, the man's own footage, and the footage of 40 strangers, and he would see a sentry warned clearly, and a man who put both hands on him anyway. And the morning would have its consequences, the slow, dull, paperwork consequences that fall on a man who lays hands on the KingsGuard, the fine and the bind over, and the long sour explaining he would have to do to 400 employees about why there was a video. I did not need to watch that part. The procedure had me. I was a statue again, eyes on the cornice, and the rest of it would unfold without me the way the gate's business always unfolds around the unmoving man at its center. But I heard one more thing before the constable let him off, and it was the thing I have carried with me from that morning more than any of the rest, more than the turn, more than the silence, more than the applause I would not bow to. The man, quieter now, deflated, genuinely confused in the way that arrogance is always at bottom a kind of confusion, said to Vale, "He could have hurt me. He had me. Why didn't he?" And he did not finish it, but I knew what the unfinished part was, because every man who has ever pushed a guardsman and been controlled instead of struck asks it, somewhere in himself, "Why didn't you make me pay?" And Vale, my old master, the man who had built me out of a frightened 17-year-old over 2 winters of frozen mornings, looked at the wreck of the man in the linen suit and gave him the answer I had spent 19 years learning to deserve. "Because the lad's better than that," he said. "I taught him myself, and the first thing I taught him, the very first thing, before the rifle, before the drill, was that the strong man's whole job is to be safe to be near. Any thug can hurt you. It takes a soldier to have you helpless and let you go. You met one this morning. Most men never do. Take it as the lesson it is, son, and go home." Then he stepped back from the man, and the constable took him, and the linen suit and the crooked jacket and the dropped swagger went away across the cobbles and out the south arch and out of my life, and I never saw him again, and I have not thought of his face in years, though I have thought of those 2 minutes a great deal, for reasons that had nothing to do with him. Because the morning was not, in the end, about the man in the linen suit. He was only the weather. He was the storm that came so that the thing under the storm could be shown. The morning was about an old man at a rail and the boy he had made, and a craft handed down across 19 years finally being asked to prove itself in the one place it was made for, with the maker there to see. And the maker had seen. You should understand what Doran Vale had been, to understand what it meant that he came. I have served under good officers and hard ones, but Vale was the only man I ever met who taught discipline as if it were a kindness, as if every cruel cold hour on the drill yard were a thing he was doing for you and not to you, which is a rare and strange way to be broken, and which is the reason I never hated him even when my hands bled on the rifle and my legs shook under me at the end of a watch. He made me stand twice as long as the manual asked. I came to the regiment at 17 with nothing but a dead father's medal and a temper I could not govern. I want you to hear that plainly, because the men who tell these stories like to pretend the wall was always a wall. I was not. I was the worst kind of recruit, quick and proud and certain I was owed something, the kind who, when a bigger lad mocked my father's regiment in the first week, swung at him in the mess hall and would have kept swinging if 3 men had not pulled me off. By every rule they should have put me out, and I have thought many times about the man I would have become if they had some smaller, louder, angrier version of the man in the linen suit, going through life swinging at whatever made him feel small. It was Vale who would not let them put me out. I did not know that for years. He never told me. An under-officer told me long after at Vale's retirement dinner that the sergeant major had stood in front of the board and said, "Give the boy to me. There's a soldier in there under all that noise, and I'd be ashamed to throw away a soldier because he came to us still bleeding." And then he took me, the worst recruit of the intake, and he spent 2 winters on me that he did not owe me and was not thanked for. He did not beat the temper out of me. That was the genius of the man. He knew you cannot beat a temper out of anyone. You can only give the fire somewhere better to go. What he did was harder and slower. He stood me on the box in the dark before any tourist came, and he provoked me himself. He would walk up to a shaking 17-year-old at 4 in the morning and say the cruelest, most exactly aimed things. Things about my father, things about my swing in the mess, things designed with a craftsman's care to find the place where the heat lived in me. And the rule was that I could not move and could not answer and could not let one flicker of it reach my face, and every time it did, and at first it always did, we began again. "I am not your enemy," he said the first morning, when I was nearly weeping with the rage of not being allowed to answer him. "I am the fool. I am every fool who will ever stand where I am standing for the rest of your life, and I am giving you the chance to lose to me here in the dark where it costs nothing, so that you will not lose to him out there in the light where it costs everything. Hate me all you like. Just don't move. It took 2 winters. Somewhere in the second one, on a black freezing morning when he said a thing about my father that a year before would have put my fist through his teeth, I felt the heat come up the back of my neck the way it always did, and then I felt myself, for the first time, hand it back. I did not carry it. I stood there and let it be his, and watched it find no purchase on me, and the morning broke gray over the east wing, and the old man looked at me a long moment and said nothing at all, and that nothing was the highest praise I ever had from him, and I have chased that nothing every day of my service since. So when I say I felt him at the rail, you must understand it was not sentiment. It was the deepest test there is. A man can hold the line for strangers easily enough. Strangers do not know where the heat lives in him. But the one man on earth who knew exactly how to break me, who had built the wall and therefore knew every seam in it, was standing 40 feet away watching a fool try every door. And the question the morning was really asking was whether the thing Vale made would hold even with Vale there to see whether it held. Whether the craft had become mine, or whether it had only ever been his, borrowed, and would crumble the moment its true owner came to claim it. That is why I gave the man in the linen suit nothing. Not for the man, not even in the end for the gate, though the gate is the reason the post exists. I gave him nothing because 19 years before, a hard, kind man had told a shaking boy that the day would come when a fool wanted the whole world to watch him break, and that on that day he should remember that his master was watching too, and give the fool nothing, and give the master everything. The day had come, and I had nothing left to prove to the man in the linen suit, who was only weather. I had everything to prove to the old man at the rail, who was the whole sky. When the constable had led the fool away, and the crowd had begun to loosen and move and turn back into ordinary tourists with ordinary phones, I expected Vale to go. That would have been like him, to come unannounced, to see what he came to see, and to leave the same way, asking nothing, taking nothing, because a man who announces himself has already begun to perform. I braced for the small grief of watching him walk back out the south arch without a word, which would have been the most Vale thing he could possibly do, and which I would have understood, and which would have been, in its way, enough. He did not go. He came and stood at the rail in front of my box, not too close, the careful civilian distance that does not crowd a sentry, the distance of a man who knows exactly what the post requires because he stood it himself for 30 years. And he waited there patient, both hands folded again on the cane, until the relief came up the line, until my watch was formally ended and I was, for the next few hours, a man again and not a wall. And only then, when the rifle was shouldered and the box was another man's and I had stepped down onto the cobbles, did the old master finally look me in the eye. I will not pretend I knew what I wanted from him in that moment. Part of me, the part that is still 17 and will be until I die, wanted him to tell me I had done well, wanted it badly, with an ache that surprised me after 19 years. And part of me knew that Vale did not give that sort of praise, had never given it, would not start now, and that to want it was itself a small failure of the discipline he had built. So I came to attention on the cobbles, the way you do for a sergeant major whether he is in uniform or in a cheap coat in a public forecourt, and I waited, the way he taught me to wait, and I gave nothing away, and I let the old man speak first. He looked at me a long time. His eyes had gone pale and rheumy with the years, but they were the same eyes that had walked a slow circle around a shaking boy in the dark, and they missed nothing now any more than they had then. He looked at the set of my shoulders and the steadiness of my hands, and the place behind my face where the heat used to live and did not live any more, and he read all of it the way he had taught me to read a forecourt, the whole sky at a glance. "They told me you'd grown into it," he said at last. I wanted to see it for myself. A man can hear a thing for years and still need to see it once with his own eyes before he can set it down. "Sir," I said, "it was all I had. My voice was not as steady as my hands." "I'm an old man," he said, "and old men get foolish, and one of the foolish things I've been carrying is wondering whether any of it took. 30 years of mornings, 10,000 boys. You spend your whole life pouring something into men and then they march off and you never know whether it held, whether you made soldiers or just made noise at them for 30 years and called it teaching." He paused, and his hands tightened on the cane and then deliberately loosened. "And then a man like that one comes along this morning. The exact man, the exact morning. The whole world watching, and the one fool in 1,000 who will actually put his hands on you. And I thought, well, now I'll see whether the thing I gave him is his, or whether it was only ever mine on loan." He stopped. The wind moved the empty flower cart behind him. The tourists flowed around us, 2 men standing still in a moving river, an old one and the one he had made. "It's yours," he said. "I watched the whole of it. The warning was clean, not a half-degree of heat in it, exactly as it's written, exactly as I drilled it. You let him pull and you didn't pull back. You waited until he made it an assault and not a heartbeat sooner. And when you finally moved," and here, for the first time in 19 years, I saw something move in the old man's own face, some small crack in his own wall quickly mastered. "When you finally moved, you took his hands off you and you gave him his balance back and you let him go, and you didn't strike a man you had every right and every reason to put on the ground in front of his own camera. You controlled and you returned. That's the whole of it. That's the thing I could never be sure I'd taught you, because it's the one thing a man can only do for real when the costing's real. And you did it. It's yours now. It was never mine to begin with, but I needed to see you own it before I could believe it." I did not trust myself to speak, so I did not. He would have understood that better than any words. "You know what you did out there," he went on, quieter now just for me. "You didn't humble that fool. The fool humbled himself, they always do. That's not your doing and you take no credit for it. What you did was harder and nobody will ever put it in a video. You stood at the exact place where my temper would have been at 17, the man's hands on me, the crowd watching, the heat coming up, and you were not the boy I pulled off a man in a mess hall. Somewhere between that boy and this morning, the angry one died, and a soldier stood up in his place, and I have spent 19 years not knowing whether I'd see that before I went. Now I have, so I'll go content. That's all I came for." And there it was, the thing he had crossed a city for, the thing he had needed once with his own eyes before he could set it down. Not the man humbled. The boy he had refused to let them throw away, the worst recruit of the intake, grown into the wall he was made into, holding the line in the one place and the one way it was made to be held, with the maker there at last to witness it. The legacy was not the footage or the fool led off in shame. It was simpler and went deeper. It was a temper governed. It was a strong man made safe to be near. It was a craft poured into a boy across 2 frozen winters and carried, unbroken, across 19 years, until it could be poured out again into the next frightened 17-year-old who would come to the regiment still bleeding. Because I knew, standing there on the cobbles, that I would do for some other boy exactly what Vale had done for me, and that this was how the thing stays alive, handed down, master to pupil, wall to wall, until the gate has stood so long that no one remembers who first taught the first man to hold it. Vale put his hand out. I took it. His grip was thin now, the strength gone out of it that had once knocked me flat in the yard, but the man behind the grip was the same, and we stood there a moment, the old soldier and the one he had made, holding on. "Stand your watch, son," he said. "I'll not keep you from it." He let go. He turned, and he walked back across the forecourt the way he had come, slow, leaning on the cane he did not really need, and he went out the south arch and into the city, and he did not look back, because a man who announces himself has already begun to perform, and Doran Vale never performed for anyone in his life. He passed the next spring. I stood his honor guard. And when the young ones come to me now, still bleeding, still swinging, certain the world owes them something, and they always come, I take the worst of them, the proud, quick, angry ones nobody else wants, and I stand them on the box in the dark before the tourists come, and I tell them what an old man once told me on a frozen morning, that the strong man's whole job is to be safe to be near, that any thug can hurt you, but it takes a soldier to have you helpless and let you go, and that the day will come when a fool wants the whole world to watch them break. And on that day, they should remember that their master is watching too, whether he is standing at the rail or has been gone these many years, and they should give the fool nothing, and give the master everything. The master watched his pupil hold. That is the whole of it. That is the only legacy a man like Vale ever wanted, and the only one worth leaving. Not a name cut in stone, but a wall still standing where he left it, holding the line he taught it to hold, ready to teach the next wall how to stand.